Hello everyone, and thank you very much for joining NextLabs and SAP for our webinar titled Automating Robust Export Controls to Prevent Violations. My name is Tiffany, and I'm happy to host this webinar. I am proud to introduce today's speakers, Bruce Romney and Dennis Andrew. Bruce is a Senior Director in the SAP Marketing Organization for Governance, Risk, and Compliance Solutions. Bruce's experience in GRC topics stem from a wide range of activities over the past 15 years. These include consulting on several engagements in the risk and advisory practice for large public accounting firms across various verticals, including utilities, oils and gas, managing large-scale e-discovery projects, and industry experience managing a contract manufacturing facility in Mexico. Bruce is licensed CPA in the state of Texas. Dennis is a Director of Professional Services and Support at NextLabs, where he is responsible for NextLabs' information risk management and export compliance consulting practices and customer support operations. He has extensive experience consulting with global enterprises in aerospace and defense, discrete manufacturing, finance, retail, and government to design, build, deploy, train, and support scalable enterprise security solutions. I would now like to turn the presentation over to Bruce.
Great, thank you, Tiffany. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today for this webinar. We're excited about the presentation that we have today and our ongoing relationship with NextLabs. Thank you, Dennis, also for joining us and for presenting with me today. As Tiffany mentioned, my name is Bruce Romney. I'm part of the Solution Marketing Organization for Governance, Risk, and Compliance Solutions. And so I just wanted to walk you quickly through the agenda, what we want to cover today. So first, we'll just do a very brief review of SAP Solutions for GRC, what that means, and our NextLabs relationship. Then we'd like to just briefly talk about customer challenges, the things that you face, and how our solutions help provide solutions for those challenges. We'll do an overview of our SAP Global Trade Services solution, and then the solution today that we'll be talking about, which is SAP Technical Data Export Compliance by NextLabs. And then Dennis will walk us through a little bit more of the technical features of that solution and a little bit of a walkthrough depicting, as you can see, how to centralize policies and controls to prevent export violations, how to enforce those policy decisions in real time, and then some of the reporting capabilities of how you monitor and track those data movements in conjunction with SAP Global Trade Services. We'll then just briefly summarize the benefits and the key points of the webinar, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. So with that, let me just go ahead and take a look at the overarching messages around our governance, risk, and compliance portfolio. So as many of you know, SAP has a large array of different product portfolios. Within this space, we have a very large and comprehensive group that manages our transportation and logistics and supply chain solutions. GTS happens to reside within what we call the governance, risk, and compliance portfolio. It is a key area for us in our compliance perspective and managing risk for importers and exporters. And across all these different solutions, we also have other solutions within GRC, which can help you manage access, so your access management and access governance. Solutions that also help with risk management, whether at the operational level or if you have a formalized enterprise risk management function in your organization. We also have solutions that help with your audit function, so those kind of solutions that your internal controls and audit group would use to manage their scoping and defining of their audits and then the conducting of those audits. Also solutions that help with areas such as fraud management. And finding where you have areas of risk within your organization through transactions and other areas. So as you can see, it's a comprehensive portfolio, and GTS is a very key part of that as well. So these solutions help in your organizations to simplify, gain insight, and strengthen. These are our key pillars for our GRC portfolio. And we won't get into a lot of detail, but our primary messages around this is the fact that we bring a lot of automation, and especially for customers who want to have integrated solutions to their back-end systems so that you're not replicating data, but you're able to tie into those in real time. That just helps from integrity perspective of your information, making sure that you have compliant processes and information so that when you're doing direct filing, for example, with GTS, that you are tracking inventories and those elements that can make sure that your reporting is accurate. And then from a gaining insight, if you're able to monitor in real time and even more importantly monitor by exception, that you're not necessarily touching every transaction, but that you have thresholds and rules that help you establish what would be an exception, that can greatly also improve and optimize your processes. And then strength, and ultimately what we're looking to do is to help organizations take advantage of the opportunities that exist for you in the marketplace and minimize the non-compliant or significant risk events from materializing. So the relationship that we have with NextLabs has been going on for several years, and we're excited to announce that it's gone from what we call endorsed business solutions now to SAP Solution Extensions. And what that means is not only do we endorse and go to market together, but now we've gone in and tested the solutions, gone through product qualification, and SAP now does, we now market these solutions as SAP branded solutions. So the support that we provide and the testing that we do is now more formalized. And as you can see on this next slide, the two solutions that we have today that are branded SAP is the SAP Technical Data Export Compliance application by NextLabs and the SAP Dynamic Authorization Management application by NextLabs. It would have been nice probably in today's webinar to be able to kind of go into depth into both of these areas. You'll see us highlight a little bit of the Dynamic Authorization Management, but overall these solutions help help your organization to better manage the overall security and protection of intellectual property, sensitive data, regulated data. Especially today we'll be focusing on the TDAC, or the Technical Data Export Compliance application. So the challenges that we help to overcome is, as many of you are aware, there's different regulations in different geographies. For example, in the U.S. we have ITAR, we have EAR. In Germany there's the BAFA, UK the ECO, for example. But what these are all trying to help accomplish is the preventing the sharing of important and technical and sensitive data to parties where it would be damaging to have that information accessed. So whether that's an actual shipment or sharing of the technical data, or whether it can be a deemed export. So that could be just access to the technical data by a foreign person in the U.S. So even though they're on U.S. soil, they should not be necessarily viewing. Or if you email a non-U.S. coworker, or if you have technical data copied to storage where non-U.S. persons have access. So even though you might have a facility in another geography that's hosting your information, that could also be looked at as a deemed export. On the technical data export side, you have a broad supply chain as well, where you're collaborating. It could be collaboration outside of your organization or even within your organization. So it could be somebody within your engineering department, somebody in your marketing organization or sales organization. It can be through email. It can be through file shares. And so you just have a lot of different areas where you have the possibility of information being accessed or exported out of the organization. And you have to be able to monitor and prevent and monitor that and be able to prevent and report on it. So just a quick overview for those of you who may or may not be as familiar with our SAP Global Trade Services. I know many of the customers today that have joined us are existing SAP Global Trade Services customers. We just completed another round with some of the analysts in the marketplace, and we're happy to say that we continue to be the leading, most adopted solution in the marketplace among all the solutions that are available. So we don't take this for granted, and we know that a lot of our customers are important to us in our co-innovation, in making sure that we continue to invest. We're happy to announce that as of last week, we publicly announced the availability of GTS 11.0. We have a lot of new exciting capabilities that are being provided through that. And more importantly, the way we deliver innovations through SAP now is we don't look just to the primary releases, right, 10.1 to an 11.0, for example, but we look to provide innovation through quarterly updates and support packs. And so this enables our customers to be able to understand what are the pieces of innovation that are being provided immediately and which are the ones that they can take advantage of. For example, in 11.0, some of the key innovations today are around some of the special customs procedures, trade preference, and also compliance and restricted party screening. So we've now enabled being able to operate with the solution in your foreign trade zones, so managing the import and export, the entry for consumption, the authorization and filings with Customs and Border Protection. All these are now enabled with 11.0. We also have other enhancements. So if you're operating on an in-memory database, the HANA in-memory database from SAP, we've now rewritten the algorithm for restricted party screening and have seen some nice improvements in that area, so that if you do have a strategy of running on an in-memory HANA database within your organization, you can now take advantage of that. The classic SPL, T-Rex search, and all those are still supported. So if that's not in your short-term roadmap, then all those classic elements are still supported. So as you can see, GTS has a very broad set of functionality that supports from the restricted party screening through the export, managing the compliance, the license determination, preparing the documents for outbound and direct filing, all the way through the mirrored side for the import, and then being able to leverage free trade agreements. So being able to configure nearly any free trade agreement in the world today, you're able to manage the trade preference category as well. The core elements of the SAP Technical Data Export Compliance solution look to extend upon what GTS is able to do. So GTS manages very well the monitoring and the inventory tracking of physical goods. The element where we have a complementary nature with the NextLabs offering is now being able to monitor and track the technical data side, and then manage the same kind of product classifications that exist within GTS, the same kind of license determination, and bring those in as some of the attributes that NextLabs looks at as part of the overall policies to then be able to enforce access in real time. So with the technical data export compliance solution, you're able to first establish robust and centralized controls to prevent those export violations. You're able to then enforce, as mentioned, the regulatory and business policies that you create in real time. And that way you can benefit from integrated end-to-end global trade compliance, which really does bring the two solutions together. And then finally you can report. So as you look at what does the complementary offering, basically it offers extending your SAP Global Trade Services footprint to now include technical data and sensitive IP into a more end-to-end robust solution for both physical goods and technical data. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dennis, who's going to walk us a little bit more through the technical aspects of the solution and then give us a little bit of a preview of some of the capabilities. Dennis, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Bruce. And again, I'm Dennis Andre from NextLabs. I manage NextLabs' export compliance and information risk management professional services practice. And I'm happy to be here with Bruce speaking to you today. As Bruce has said, the solution that we are concentrating on discussing with you today has to do with taking core capabilities or core items that are tracked within SAP GTS and using those to enforce compliance using NextLabs in situations or in technologies that are outside of SAP. So what you see on this diagram that is in front of you on the screen, that what the user is really doing here is accessing data on a Windows file share or moving data using Outlook email. So this really addresses an issue that comes up a lot when we talk to SAP customers where they say, well, we know that NextLabs has a solution that operates inside of SAP. That's another product called the SAP Dynamic Authorization Management. But they're saying very often we have situations where before the data is actually ever stored in SAP, we are sometimes creating documents and other items that are related to the controlled technical data but we are moving those items around with email, and we're storing them outside of SAP on places like file shares. So that's the example that we're illustrating here. We see here that GTS is providing us with product classification and export license details. As you may know, NextLabs operates on attributes. So all of NextLabs' decisions for access control are based on the attributes of the users, the attributes of the data, and the context around which the user is trying to access the data. In this case, when a user is going to try to access data on a file share or using Outlook email, we are going to rely on attributes that are housed in and provided to NextLabs by SAP GTS. So GTS integrates with NextLabs Control Center, which is the central nervous system of NextLabs, if you will, and provides this definition information, which NextLabs then instantiates into NextLabs policies. NextLabs then has technologies that operate within the Windows file shares and within Microsoft Outlook that enforce various policies which are constructed to control access to technical data or activity related to technical data. Then, when decisions are made, so when a user goes in and tries to access data on the file share and is successful, we record that event with the user information, the document that was opened, the characteristics of the document. We send all of that back to GTS, and GTS integrates that with the physical goods reporting. So we then have an integrated report template which shows us not only the physical goods movement and the creation of all of the normal GTS products, work products, but it also shows all of the technical data accesses that were related to the goods that are tracked in GTS. If we dig a little deeper into the NextLabs architecture, this is kind of taking the diagram that you just saw and just flipping it over on its side. So what you'll see here is on the right, SAP GTS. So this is where we're storing the classification attributes, and we're also storing the license attributes. There is an adapter that is part of the NextLabs solution called the Export Control Adapter that connects SAP GTS with NextLabs Control Center. The data comes from SAP GTS into NextLabs Control Center and is then instantiated into the NextLabs policies. Those policies are then pushed out to what we call a policy controller. A policy controller is a decision point at which a user is either denied or allowed going forward with some type of action. In this diagram, we're showing you a decision point that is connected to a Microsoft file share. It's called our entitlement manager for file servers, and another policy controller that's connected to NextLabs data protection for Microsoft Outlook. So now what happens once we've got this data from GTS and we've instantiated the data into the NextLabs policies, users will go out and try to access the data or try to email an attachment or something like that. And when they take specific actions, the application enforcer, either in file server or Outlook, will ask the NextLabs policy controller for a decision based on the policies that are in force. And they then receive an immediate allow or deny, and that allow or deny is recorded and then sent back through the export control adapter into the SAP GTS reporting module so that the data can be reported into a SAP GTS consolidated report. What I want to do now is show you a click-through demo which will illustrate how this operates in the real world. So let's set this up with our example company, which we fondly call Acme, the Fortune 500 company. They are in the aerospace and defense industry where they design and manufacture various aircraft. They also, as many of you do, I'm sure, collaborate with many partners around the world. And they have 400 projects and about 100 partners going on, and they have literally thousands of licenses and other related documents like NDAs and contracts which are tracked in the SAP GTS module. And their use case is export compliance and controlled access to data based on licenses. In the design process at Acme, when new requirements are being defined, Acme engineers communicate by email. So they create documents. They classify these documents very early in the document lifecycle, which is a best practice, and then they move these documents around among their own team using email. As the requirements get better defined, they then begin sharing them with a wider audience by moving them to a Microsoft file share where they share the design documents that are the results of the requirements. So in the process that they are using, Acme employees define the requirements. And as I said, they share them with Outlook. But there is a specific use case here. Much of their data is classified under the EAR. And EAR, to be in compliance with the restrictions at Acme, is accessible only by Acme US employees. However, this is tied to EAR licenses that are tracked for physical goods in SAP GTS. So we have the integration in place with Acme. Now what you see on your slide now is a view into the NextLabs policy authoring tool called the NextLabs Policy Studio. This, quite simply, is the policy that says that all Acme engineers are allowed to email controlled technical data, which is defined here as called a product spec, and a product spec behind the scenes is identified as an EAR document. So they are allowed to email EAR documents only to other Acme engineers. Okay, so you'll notice here, if you can see it, I know it's a little bit blurry for some people, the recipients of this email must be Acme engineers. So here we have two Acme engineers. We have Jimmy Carter, who comes from the famed NextLabs President's Database, as does Herbert Hoover. And in this use case, Jimmy Carter is employed by Acme. He's a U.S. citizen. Herbert Hoover is employed by Acme, but he's a UK citizen. So Jimmy Carter logs into his Windows desktop. He goes out and finds this requirements document. It's a requirements document for an extensible panel. It's covered under the EAR. He takes that document. He attaches it to an Outlook email that he is going to send to Herbert Hoover. So here on slide 35, you can see that he has written an email to Herbert Hoover, and he has attached this Acme product specification. However, there is a policy in place that says that Acme engineers can only share this controlled technical data covered under the EAR with other Acme engineers. So when he attempts to send this document, a pop-up comes up that informs him that only Acme engineers who are U.S. citizens can send and receive technical data. Since Herbert Hoover is not a U.S. citizen but a U.K. citizen, then this email is not sent. So NextLabs has intervened when you'll see up in the upper left, when Jimmy Carter pressed the send button, NextLabs made a policy decision that said we are not going to send this email because it violates Acme Policy 1, which is an email policy saying that only U.S. Acme engineers can email or receive the controlled technical data covered under the EAR. Now let's move on to a second use case, and this is a use case where we are looking at activity on a file share, which is again controlled by information that we pulled out of SAP GTS because it manages the classification and the licenses. In this case, during the engineering collaboration phase, certain aspects of the design are reviewed by an in-house partner firm called Creative. And the design documents and drawings are shared with the Creative employees using a Windows file server. So here again, we have EAR classified documents. EAR documents cannot be shared to non-Acme members unless the non-Acme personnel are covered under EAR license, which has got ECCN 3A991 attached. And then whenever users access this data using the EAR license, we need to report that activity back in SAP GTS, even though it was enforced in NextLabs outside of SAP. So here again, we have a view into the NextLabs Policy Studio, and here we are allowing Acme engineers and Acme team members at Creative to open EAR documents which are covered under the 3A991 related license. So again, we have Jimmy Carter, our friendly Acme US engineer, and we have John Tyler, who is a Creative employee, but he's also a US citizen. So he is eligible, along with Jimmy, to use the EAR license to access the data. So Jimmy Carter logs into his Windows desktop. He takes the Acme design document and he copies it from his desktop. He goes out to a file share that is used with Creative. He pastes it onto the file share so that it can be used or accessed by Creative, who also has access to the file share. Now John Tyler goes into his desktop, goes out to the share to which both he and the Acme engineers have access. Jimmy Carter says that he can go to this location and find this document. So he finds the document and he opens it up. When he opens it up, the NextLabs policy, as you'll see in the lower right-hand corner of the screen, generates a user education message that says that creative team members and in the U.S. can access this data under the 3A991 related license. So we use the NextLabs policy not only to monitor the access to the document and report it back to GTS, but we're also doing some user education in the process. So now we have gone through a couple of exercises. We have done an access where we have tried to email a document and been denied because the recipient was not a U.S. citizen. And we've got another one where we use an EAR license to allow certain people to access the data. There are some jobs scheduled in NextLabs that allow the data that is collected in NextLabs by the policies to be sent back to SAP GTS and consolidated into the GTS reports. So here we are looking at a GTS report which is going to display the existing export documents from the time period that includes the time period when this action took place, which was the the end of June. Okay, so here we have 30.06 as the end date and 0101 as the begin date. Okay, so it'll pick up everything at least through today from the beginning of the year. And here we see a display of existing export documents, and included in that display of the export documents are a listing of the accesses that we saw in the click-through demo, where a user attempted to email a document and was denied, and another user attempted to access a document on a file share and was allowed. And that then is integrated with all of the accesses that are tracked natively in the SAP GTS reporting tool. Okay, so that is the demo portion of the webinar. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Bruce, and he is going to go into a summary of the benefits of the SAP NextLabs collaborative solution for GTS.
Great, thank you, Dennis. That was very helpful and informative. Appreciate that. So hopefully you're able to see how the two solutions complement each other and what they're striving towards. This is another depiction of that, where you can see the little coding here at the bottom shows the technical data export compliance in the little gray circle with the SAP Global Trade Services blue circle, and where they work together, whether that's at the initial managing of the export authorization through the classification of technical data and users. So as you saw, there's the ability to establish policies with your own attributes within the control center, or you can also pull those from GTS as well to aggregate those and have them in one centralized location. And then you can see the controlling access, so the actual enforcement, blocking, and the education of the users and the recording of why that event took place and what the result was is then brought into GTS for one consolidated view of the reporting element. So just a quick review then. SAP Technical Data Export, it really is helping us have a more end-to-end trade compliance solution. It integrates, as you saw, closely with SAP GTS. It provides that compliance management in conjunction with GTS for both physical and technical goods. And information, it has that single repository for all compliance-related master data, so the recording of the events, and then also reflects evolving legislative requirements so that you can keep that updated and know that you're complying with the most recent regulatory pronouncements. So with that, we've gotten to the end of the portion that we had considered for presentation, and we would certainly encourage you to ask any questions in the Q&A in the chat window. Tiffany, I don't know if there's some that you want to select, and Dennis and I can do our best to answer those.
Absolutely. Thank you, Bruce. So I see there's a few questions, so I'll read off the first one. It says, our global company has large numbers of classified materials covered by thousands of licenses from multiple jurisdictions, both U.S. and non-U.S. Will I need to change large numbers of NextLabs policies in order to control access to the technical data? Dennis, maybe you can answer this one.
Okay, sure, Tiffany. I'd be glad to. The short answer is no. Within NextLabs, we have a very well-developed policy engine. And the API that we use to create policies is a drag and drop API. We've developed some policy methodologies over our years of experience that allow you to address things like licenses with a relatively small number of policies. It all has to do with the strategies that you use to do license matching, because really when you're matching a license, you're concerned about attributes from the user, things like citizenship and employer and location, and you're also concerned with attributes from the data, like product family and program and things like that. And then you're also concerned with attributes from the license, like product family and jurisdiction and citizenship requirements and so on. So we've got several strategies in which we can, match those in a very efficient manner so that we can literally address thousands of possible combinations with a relatively small number of policies.
So I see another question. It's, how many people will I need to add to my SAP team to maintain the TDEC solution?
Okay, that's that's another rather interesting question, because one of the questions that we get at NextLabs a lot is, if I'm going to build policies and maintain a policy ecosystem that is going to literally cover, divisions that are all over the world and multiple jurisdictions and multiple product lines and things like that, then it must take a lot of people to maintain NextLabs. And my answer to that ordinarily is that when you implement NextLabs, now let's suppose, for instance, that you're an SAP customer and you've got SAP GTS, and you decide today that you're going to implement the SAP TDEC solution with NextLabs. My gut feeling is that it will probably take you on the order of less than one FTE, full-time equivalent person, globally to administer NextLabs. And the reason I say FTE is that you will need several skill sets, but combined, it's probably one FTE or less. If you add additional NextLabs products, like suppose you added the SAP Dynamic Authorization Management solution, and then you added NextLabs for SharePoint and other things like that, then that number might creep up to 1.5 FTE or possibly 2 FTE globally to manage NextLabs. So again, once you acquire NextLabs as part of this TDEC solution, as you expand NextLabs to other places, it's a very small incremental personnel requirement that is added to your staff.
So here's another question. It says, you mentioned SAP Dynamic Authorization Management. How does this differ from the technical data export compliance solution you have described today? Bruce, maybe you can take this one.
Yeah, I can. And Dennis, if you want to add anything. But so that's a good question, and hopefully you're able to see in detail the technical data export compliance. But as far as dynamic authorization, so a lot of the underlying technology between TDEC and DAM solutions is shared, although there are some differences with DAM, as you heard. I describe it probably best as different use cases for the two solutions, and you'll see that there are combined benefits or outcomes. So TDEC, as we saw, is best suited for an organization who has implemented SAP GTS, which will then supply those attributes that are used in the policy decisions for the enforcement of those business or regulatory-based rules. And then, as Dennis showed, there's primarily product classification and license requirements to feed that. These scenarios then are best described as managing the technical data that lies outside of the SAP environment through the Outlook Enforcer and the File Server Enforcer. So with Dynamic Authorization Management solution, I'd say offers added layers to now focus on the data that lives within the SAP environment, whether that's in ECC or PLM, your Product Lifecycle Management or FICO, CRM, and others. So in that context, you have a broader set of attributes from which to define policies and enforce in those SAP environments. One of those feeder solutions that we have integration with is also with access control. So with access control, you have the management of your roles, all your segregation of duty risks and rule sets that are described there. So that can also feed into your dynamic authorization for that real-time enforcement. So adding dynamic authorization allows for the broader conversation around secure collaboration and protection, not only of sensitive data from a export compliance perspective, but also from intellectual property. Companies are also looking to protect against these data breaches and their IP going out, as well as just your overall security and sensitive data. So the addition of the attributes that you can get through dynamic authorization, such as role-based or segregation of duties. You can also define around sensitivity, such as project-based, or if something requires an NDA, for example, signed before somebody can access it. These are all added features within dynamic authorization that tie directly into your SAP environment. So hopefully that gives you a general overview of kind of the two scenarios with I guess, combined outcomes as well.
Thanks, Bruce. I think we have time for just a few more questions. So the next one is, where does the classification attribute of the product spec reside? In a material master or ...
Okay, that's a really interesting question because, as we showed in the demo, we were actually doing enforcement on attributes that seemed to be part of the document. Now, one of the things that's available to us, if you are tracking classification attributes in GTS, those attributes can be brought over and used to classify or create metadata for things like Microsoft Office documents and PDFs and CAD drawings and things like that. And we encourage customers to use the same classification attributes as they move around across their different technologies. But physically, when we enforce at the Windows file share or when we enforce in email, the documents that we are enforcing on need to have the attributes attached as metadata. Okay, so we have got in the demo that we showed you, we've implemented a way to take the classifications, the product classifications in GTS and make those available so that they are part of the classification process for the documents as well. Then the GTS attributes are used to inform the policies, which then interpret the attributes that are physically on the documents at the time that access is requested.
So here's another question. For a ECC6 platform, what's the standard time to implement the functionality?
That's a loaded question in a way, but it's also a very good question. When we think about implementing NextLabs in SAP, generally the SAP process of going from dev to QA to production, the normal three-step promotion process in SAP, it ordinarily takes us longer simply to get through that process than it does to deploy NextLabs. For instance, we could start this afternoon, and we could have NextLabs live in your dev environment in a day or so. It just doesn't take that much to get NextLabs itself set up. The integration with SAP is straightforward and is done by means of configuration. The harder part is dealing with your classifications. How are your users classified? Where is that stored? How is your data classified? How do you handle licenses? And what is your process for license validation and other things like that? Those are the real important questions. The standard answer that we give is that a solution can be implemented within a 12 to 16 week cycle, provided that the data is in relatively decent shape. Okay, and again, that's sometimes a big if, but if you're running SAP and you've been running GTS for a while, you're managing licenses, you've got users, well, your users are classified, you're tracking citizenship, you're tracking employer, you're tracking location for the users, and you've got your license information readily available in GTS, then I think we could probably meet the 16-week gauntlet without too much problem. But again, the other interesting thing that happens is that once we get started on these projects, a lot of people like what they see, and things begin to expand. So what we generally do with NextLabs is not boil the ocean. We want to pick a subset of things that we want to address first. For instance, maybe we want to address one product line or one division or one technology, or one something or one group of users, and then implement NextLabs there first, get everybody trained on the development side, and then go on to rinse and repeat.
I think we have time for just one more question. If any of your questions were not answered during this Q&A session, we'll be responding to you via email. But for the last question, it says here, licenses might become invalid on GTS. How will this be reflected to the policy?
Okay, that's another really interesting question, and that really has to do with the integration. So policies are living things, and one of the issues that we address in NextLabs with all of our customers is, what is your timing on the attribute data that is used in the policies? So the question on licenses, if we say we have an integration with GTS and this license data is either updated on a cycle, so say we update the license data once a day, and then that would mean that the policies would then get refreshed in terms of the license data once a day, then we would reflect those in the daily update. Or maybe it's once an hour, or once every half hour. And I've seen situations like this where in certain cases there's a very high volume of activity, and that's necessary. But to make a short story long, what we would do is we would suss that out in the requirements and design, and we would implement a timing factor for syncing up the GTS license state with the policy license state so that it would meet your criteria.
So that was our last question. This will wrap up our live Q&A session for today. Thank you, Bruce and Dennis, for a great presentation. Before we end today's call, I would like to encourage all of you to reach out to Bill Doss to request a copy of our SAP Technical Data Export Compliance Solution Brief, or schedule a meeting with Bill to find out about our solutions for information risk management, or schedule a demo. We'll be sending out the recording of this webinar in the next week, so please watch out for it. Again, thank you for joining us today. We hope this session has been informative for you. This concludes our SAP and NextLabs webinar. Bye-bye now.